officers, including Captain Dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. Then, after a long, tense silence, 2 final words: "I die." This was the last message ever sent from the SS Ourang Medan. The message itself is terrifying, but the scene that awaited the rescue crew was worse. In the vast, shifting wilderness of the world's oceans, a ship is more than a vessel. It is a sanctuary, a fragile bubble of human life suspended over an abyss. But sometimes that bubble remains intact, while life within it simply vanishes. Here we examine what happened on the SS Ourang Medan, along with 4 other cases of ships that defy logic. Prepare to enter
The Witness Ledger.
Entry number 015. Location: Beaufort Sea, Canada. Date: October 1931. Subject: SS Baychimo. Vanished, then repeated sightings and boardings of the vessel. The ledger remains open. October 1st, 1931. The Baychimo was steaming through the Beaufort Sea, her hold heavy with a fortune in furs. Suddenly, the pack ice closed in. The ship was trapped in a white vice that threatened to crush her hull like an eggshell. The crew abandoned ship, building a temporary shelter on the ice, waiting for the inevitable. On November 24th, a massive blizzard struck. When the storm cleared the next morning, the crew stepped out of their shelters to find nothing. The Baychimo was gone. Her captain assumed she had finally succumbed to the pressure and sunk to the bottom of the dark Arctic waters. He was wrong. A few days later, an Inuit hunter reported seeing the ship 45 miles away, perfectly upright and still trapped in the ice. Over the next 4 decades, the Baychimo became the North's most elusive ghost. 1933. A group of Eskimos boarded her, trapped by a sudden storm, for 10 days. They reported the ship felt alive with the groaning of the ice. 1939. A captain on another vessel tried to board her, but the moving floes made it impossible to reach the deck. 1962. She was seen again, drifting aimlessly in the Beaufort Sea. 1969, the final recorded sighting. A group of Inuit saw her frozen into a pack of ice nearly 40 years after she was first lost. The SS Baychimo hasn't been seen since 1969. Some say she finally sank. Others believe she is still out there, encased in a massive iceberg, a steel tomb for a fortune in rotting furs, drifting through the dark where no human eye will ever find her. The ledger keeps a watch on the ice. Entry number 016. Location: vessel deported from Samoa. Date: October 1955. Subject: MV Joyita. Vessel failed to arrive at its destination. Found with all crew and passengers missing, the sea holds many secrets. The Pacific is a vast graveyard, but rarely does it return its dead with more questions than answers. In October 1955, the MV Joyita set sail from Samoa with 25 souls on board. It was a journey of only 270 miles, a 2-day trip. When she was found 5 weeks later, drifting north of Fiji, the Joyita was a ghost. She was listing heavily, her decks flooded, and the air inside was thick with the smell of rot. But it wasn't the damage that defied explanation. It was what and who was missing. Every single person had vanished. The MV Joyita was called the ship that couldn't sink. Her hull was lined with 18 cubic meters of thick cork for refrigeration, making her a floating fortress. Yet in October 1955, she was found drifting 600 miles off course in the South Pacific, half submerged but still stubbornly afloat. All 25 people on board gone. Inside the flooded cabins, the investigation found a chilling detail. Every electric clock on the ship had stopped at exactly 10:25. On the deck, investigators found a doctor's bag. It was open, lying in the sun. Inside were 4 lengths of bloody bandages. Someone had been seriously injured, perhaps even dying, while the rest of the crew made a choice that defies logic. The radio was tuned to the international distress frequency, but a wire was broken, hidden under a fresh layer of paint. They had been screaming for help into a void, their signals traveling no more than 2 miles. The captain knew the Joyita was unsinkable. He knew the cork would keep them above the waves. So why did 25 people abandon a floating sanctuary for the shark-infested waters of the Pacific? Did they flee the ship? Or were they fleeing something that had already come aboard? The ship was sound. The hull was intact. There was no reason to leave. Why would they choose the dark water over the safety of the deck? Entry number 017. Location: halfway between the Azores and Portugal. Date: 1872. Subject: Mary Celeste. Found with all crew and passengers missing. The tide does not return all it takes. December 5th, 1872. The Dei Gratia is cutting through the Atlantic between the Azores and Portugal when they spot a ghost. A brigantine, the Mary Celeste, is sailing erratically, her sails torn but her hull riding high. When the boarding party stepped onto the deck, they found a ship that was perfectly seaworthy and perfectly empty, found in December 1872, halfway between the Azores and Portugal. She was under sail, but her wheel was spinning loose. When the boarding party from the Dei Gratia stepped onto those decks, they found a ghost. The captain's bed was unmade. His daughter's toys were scattered. A sewing machine sat on a table with a phial of oil balanced on top, so still it hadn't even tipped over. 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol sat in the hold. Not a drop was missing. The ship's chronometer, navigation clock, was gone, suggesting an intentional but panicked evacuation. 10 people stepped off that sanctuary into a single lifeboat and straight into the pages of legend. No body was ever found, no lifeboat wreckage ever washed up. To this day, the Atlantic holds the receipt for 10 souls who left a perfectly good ship for the crushing dark of the open sea. Entry number 018. Location: Diamond Shoals, North Carolina. Date: 1921. Subject: the Carroll A. Deering. Crew vanished. Some horizons are not meant to be crossed. In the winter of 1921, the graveyard of the Atlantic claimed another victim. But this wasn't a shipwreck. It was a vanishing. The Carroll A. Deering was a 5-masted schooner, a massive, beautiful bird of the sea. When she was found hard aground on Diamond Shoals, North Carolina, her sails were set, her hull was intact, and her galley was full of food. But the deck was silent. The Ledger's investigation begins 2 days before the discovery. The Deering passed the Cape Lookout lightship. A man leaned over the railing, a tall, thin man with fiery red hair and a foreign accent. He shouted through a megaphone, claiming the ship had lost its anchors in a storm. But there is a discrepancy in the record. The man with the megaphone was not Captain Wormel. The captain was an experienced, older seaman with a distinct bearing. Why was a stranger commanding the Deering's communications? When the Coast Guard finally boarded the grounded vessel, they found a scene frozen in time. In the galley, pots of pea soup and pans of spare ribs sat on the stove. The food was still there, mid-preparation, as if the crew had been called away in the middle of a heartbeat. The logbook was gone, the navigation equipment was missing, 2 lifeboats had been launched. To this day, the FBI's file remains open. Was it a mutiny, piracy, or did the red-haired stranger lead them into something far darker? Entry number 019, location Straits of Malacca, date 1947, subject the SS Ourang Medan, all crew dead, the silence is the only witness. Some stories are so terrifying that history tries to forget them. In June of 1947, 2 American ships, the City of Reading and the Silver Star, picked up a Morse code distress signal. The dots and dashes were frantic, broken. All officers, including captain, dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. Then a long, agonizing silence, followed by 2 final words. I die. When the boarding party from the Silver Star stepped onto the Ourang Medan in the Straits of Malacca, they found a graveyard. There were no wounds, no blood, no signs of a struggle, but every man, from the captain on the bridge to the engineer in the boiler room, was dead. They were found on their backs, arms outstretched as if fending off an invisible attacker. Their teeth were bared, and their eyes were wide, staring at the sun with expressions of absolute, frozen agony. Even the ship's dog was found mid-snarl, its life extinguished in a moment of pure terror. As the rescuers prepared to tow the ghost ship, smoke began to billow from the lower holds. They fled just before the Ourang Medan exploded and sank, taking every body and every clue to the bottom of the ocean. Was it a leak of hazardous chemicals? Or did the crew see something in the clouds that the human heart simply isn't built to survive? The ocean does not just claim ships, it sometimes only claims the people who sail them. The vessels remain, drifting monuments to a moment of panic we will never understand. If you have stood on a shore and seen a light where no ship should be, we are listening. Send your story to
The Witness Ledger.